What's up, guys, and welcome back to Stories from the Shop, where this time we have a story from a shop that I've never talked about, because I forgot. I actually only volunteered here for one day, and it was just kind of by circumstance that all of this happened anyways, and it was a pretty neat day for me, a pretty special day, and goodness, I wish I could remember some of the stories that I got told on this day, too. And I'm talking about the time that I volunteered one-on-one with Doyle McCormack at the Oregon Rail Heritage Foundation, ORHF. If you're not familiar, Doyle's the guy that got the 40 for 49 running for the first time in the 70s again for the Freedom Train, and then ran the American Freedom Train. Like, Doyle's one of the legends out there. And I was down in Portland kind of in the middle of the week, because I was actually recording an album. Fun fact, I've put out technically 3 different rock and roll and blues, whatever, Americana kind of records. And I was recording the first one with a friend of mine. I did all of the instruments, the drums, the guitar, the bass, the keys, the everything, a little bit of backup vocals, but as you've probably heard on at least a recent stream, which is actually partially why my voice is dead, singing is not necessarily my forte, at least not in a rock and roll kind of capacity. So my friend Tate sang for it for the Rise of the Phoenix, which was a record that we put out under the label the RLN, the Rollin', which was just, fun, silly rock and roll things. But Tate lived in Portland, so I was down there staying with him, and I was working for BNSF at the time. And so my weekends were all kinds of bizarre, weird scheduling everything. So Tate had a normal people job and had normal times to be in an office and was spending his days working, and we'd record in the evenings. And there was one day that we were there, middle of the week, and it was like a huge snowstorm back in 2018, I think. Kind of February, March-ish, if I had to guess. And like the whole city was shut down. Like there was nothing going on in Portland. So I decided to pop by and see if there was anything going on at the ORHF, just to see what was up rather than anything else. Like I wasn't even going with the intention of doing anything. I was like, oh, maybe they're open. Maybe I can go see what's going on. And I pull up, and there was one car in the parking lot, one little truck, and that was it. And it was like, okay, well, maybe they're closed. I don't know. So I texted my friend Scott, who came out and fired coal with us on the 346 a couple years prior, because Scott volunteered with the 40 for 49 and Doyle and was, knew all the dudes and everything. So I was like, hey, Scott, who would this be? Is this a random visitor or whatever? And he goes, oh, that's Doyle's truck. It's like, oh, okay. I guess, so what do I do? And Scott just goes, oh, just go right on in like you own the place and go say hi and tell him, you're a friend of mine. I go, oh, okay. And I walked in and Doyle was there talking with some other individual that had wandered in, friend of his. Go up to Doyle, introduce myself, ask if, there's anything going on. And he's like, no, there's nothing going on today. I don't need any help. Like, I appreciate, was very kind, but was gently trying to tell me no. And I sat there and I didn't argue with him so much, but I was basically telling the truth of, hey, man, I got literally nothing to do all day. I'm just looking to kill time. If you just need a gopher to hand you wrenches, like, that's it. And he's like, well, I've got kind of like a mental challenging problem to solve today that I'm working on. And he was really trying to, no, I don't need the help. And so I kind of badgered him around a bit, and he finally relented and said, okay, yeah, you can come volunteer. He's working on the PA, the Alco PA diesel locomotive that he owned at the time personally. Got stored at ORHF, but it was Doyle's locomotive. And so Doyle was getting it back running again, and he had gotten the engine in it out of a marine situation, some kind of boat. A lot of times boats and ships, I guess, ship technically. I don't want the boat people to come after me. So, sorry in advance, our friend Mike Brady. Ship. It's such a pretty boat. Ship, yes. In my best Jack Sparrow. He got it out of a marine situation, whatever. So the only difference between this normal Alco locomotive engine and this marine version of it was the crankcase was taller so that it could store more oil, so that as the ship rocked and pitched and the whole thing and rolled, that the oil wouldn't, end up being too low. It would still get picked up. So they made the crankcase taller, which made the whole engine 3 inches taller. And so he had to reline all of the things that attached to the engine up 3 inches to make sure that all this stuff would work. And so he was working on aligning one of the shafts out the back of the locomotive. I can't remember on an Alco if that's the front of the engine. Diesels are silly. Anyway, on this particular locomotive, there was an air compressor that was shaft driven. And then from the air compressor, there was another shaft that ran to a 90-degree shaft coupling that then ran to a fan up in the roof, all mechanically run off the crankshaft of the engine. It was kind of goofy. And he was trying to align that 90-degree coupling box to the air compressor. And he's got this really neat sprung-loaded simulation of the shaft so that he could have dial indicators on this sprung-loaded thing, toss them in place into the machine centers and the machine surfaces on the two things, and he could check with the dial indicator where it was sitting. So you could sit there and kind of scribe around and get measurements and see where it was sitting. So was it canted this way, that way, any which direction? Because there was a small tolerance. I want to say it was like 30 thousandths, but those two surfaces basically needed to be almost perfectly parallel. And he looks at me as we sit down and he points out what's going on. And I was a fledgling machinist at the time. Very, very early in my time. Obviously, this was after done at the museum. So I say fledgling machinist, but I spent about 1,000 hours rebuilding 491's million thousand bushings, but I mean that's just boring, literally boring, and just boring because boring. Yeah, anyone who's been there done that, having to size up holes like an inch with a boring bar. Oh my god, yeah, I wish we had a better setup, but anyway, that's another story. So I knew how to read dial indicators. I understood what he was doing. We talked about doing these sorts of alignments on the modern locomotives we had at the BNSF all the time. And so Doyle asks, and he goes, do you know how to read a dial indicator? And I go, yeah. And he goes, okay, well, what does that read? And he was testing me. And it was like, well, it shows, 30 thousandths. And he goes, over or under? And it's like, oh, well, over, because the needle moved that way. And he goes, okay, well, what's this read? Quizzing me the whole way. And we kind of figured out how it needed to be. We figured out where the box was to start with. And in my head, immediately I'm trying to problem solve and figure it out. And Doyle was sitting there doing some math on the napkin. And basically what it was the coupling box was too low and the rear of it was too low. So they were kind of sitting like this. So we needed to raise this guy and bring it up by raising the back more than the front. And by getting the couple measurements we took, it was pretty straight and clear right ahead to me. I mean, it just came to me kind of naturally. Sometimes that geometric kind of problem solving and machining stuff is one of my favorite things. So it was pretty natural for me. And I was sitting there and I'd figured it out, and I'm not going to tell Doyle McCormack what to do on his locomotive. Like, I was sitting there waiting like, okay. And he said what he thought needed to happen at the time. I think he got some numbers backwards in his math or whatever. And it said kind of the opposite of what I thought needed to happen. And so it was like, what do you do? How do you tell this legend? Like, come on, he's still on the pedestal in my head. Like, I can't tell this guy anything. Like, holy crap, this is Doyle, And so we tried it, and the numbers got worse. And it was like, okay, well, why did it do that? And at that point, I gently suggested, like, I think we need to do this. And he was like, I think you're right. And so, we made an adjustment and changed some shims and things, and it was a lot closer, way closer than it was even before we'd made the first move. And then Doyle asks me, what do we do next? And I'm sitting here like, I'm like a 21-year-old kid at the point. I mean, no, it's 24. Details. I was young and fairly new to this stuff, new to diesel locomotives, new to the shop, the whole thing. And this guy is now asking me what to do on his locomotive. And we had the measurements, and it was like, okay, well, we need to bring up the back just a little more. We had raised the whole thing just enough, but the back needed to come up more relative to it. I suggested that again, and then we raised it up, and it was almost perfect. And he goes, okay, well, I'll weld these in place and whatever, and that was kind of that. And in between this, I mean, just getting to be in the same room as that guy, that man, he probably told me 20 different stories that day from his time as an engineer on the Southern Pacific, and I wish I could remember enough of the details of each story to be able to share those, because what a wealth of experience and history and knowledge that man is. It was one of those afternoons where it's like, I'm getting to volunteer with this guy. I'm going to shut up and listen to whatever the hell he has to tell me, because no matter what it is, it's going to be interesting. And oh my goodness, that was one of the coolest treasures for me of all time, particularly knowing that my favorite standard gauge engine is the GS4, the Daylight, the 4449. And here's the guy who's been there, done that, got the t-shirt many times over with it. So it was pretty cool. We got the coupling box aligned, and then he was going to do the vertical shaft up to the fan next on another day, and kind of wrapped up for the day, and that was that. But oh my goodness, what a cool day, what a treat. Just going from, I don't think there's going to be anything to do, I'm going to be bored in Portland, oh, I guess I could go stop by ORHF, see what's going on, and bumping into Doyle, and then kind of being told, no, I don't need any help, and then being able to do that, and then actually contributing a significant amount. I'm sure he would have figured it out, and he didn't truly need me for that. I mean, he was going to figure it out at some point anyway. But I helped out. I got to contribute and, made it happen a little quicker maybe. So it was just a fun time. What a treat. So hope you guys liked the little story. You never might know what you might run into and what you might get to do in preservation if you put yourself out there. So make sure you're giving yourself those chances, because you never know what might happen. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch y'all next time.